Hi, I'm Garth from traderscorner.co.za, and this is your weekly look at the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ indices. So as usual, we start with the daily chart of the S&P 500 and have a look at the trading activity there. What's evident is that the upward trend is still very much intact. You can see this market trading above all the crucial moving averages that we monitor there. The 15-period exponential moving average is the short one that we're looking at there. Then we've also got a 50-day moving average and a 200-day moving average. The 3200 area is lateral support on this chart, and the market traded down into that area earlier this week and held that support level and looks as if it's trying to now push up off of that support. And that support zone corresponds with the area of the 15-period exponential moving average. Also notice on this chart that your stochastic oscillator is forming positive reverse divergence, and that is what happens when the stochastic oscillator makes a lower low, and yet the price continues to move higher and the price makes a higher low. And that's a bullish setup in a rising trend, and it typically does indicate further upside still to come. If we then move on and take a look at the hourly chart of the S&P 500, you can see the critical levels that we're monitoring over there. So 3200 is a big lateral support zone, as I mentioned on the previous chart. You can see how that has contained the selling pressure over the last week, and buyers seem to have been evident at that area. What we'd ideally want to see here is for the price to move up above those short-term moving averages. So above 3240 would be a bullish development, and that would probably then set the market up for another challenge of the prior top at 3280. To the downside, if we were to see 3200 breaking lower, then your next support zone to watch is at 3180, and below that then 3130 would be the next support area to watch. I think what we need to keep an eye on here is the possibility of the right shoulder of a head and shoulders pattern forming here on this hourly chart. But for the moment, whilst the general trend is still upwards, I'd place a low probability on that outcome. Let's then move on to the NASDAQ 100 chart. And here what you can see is, again, a very strong chart setup, a nice, well-defined upward trend. You can see how the market pulled back into trend line support earlier this week, and it held that support zone at about 10,300. It's moved up off that area nicely, and it looks as if the buyers are trying to make a stand again and push this market back up towards the prior highs near 11,000. Notice your relative strength index staying above 50, and that's always a good indication that the upward trend is still intact. And then on our stochastic oscillator, we see positive reverse divergence forming there, which is, as I mentioned previously, that's where your stochastic oscillator makes a lower low reading, and yet your price is making a higher low within a broader upward trend. And that typically has a somewhat of a slingshot type of effect, where it typically sees the market pushing higher after that pattern is formed. Then let's move on to the NASDAQ hourly chart. And here again, you can see the overall upward trend still very much intact. Over the last few days, the market has been range bound, with the area at around 10,400 coming in as lateral support. And then up at the upper end, you've got 11,000, which presents overhead resistance. So for the time being, those are your support and resistance areas to monitor. The chart remains bullish whilst it's above that rising trend. So for the time being, I'd still place a high probability on the likelihood that this market moves up and tests 11,000 once again. That's all that I've got for you this week. I'll be back again next week with another look at the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ indices.